Hi, and welcome to our Google Workspace training. Rather than recording our actual Google trainings, I thought it might just be easier to record one video with all the topics that we chatted about, and that way it could be something that we can reference if we need to. So this is going to be an overview of Google Workspace, including some pieces of Google Chrome, a lot of Google Drive, a lot about creating and sharing and organizing, and then also some functions across the Google Workspace that are similar no matter which app you're using or building in, and some other things thrown in there along the way as well. All right, so let's get started. When we started talking about Google Workspace, we clarified a few things from the beginning. One, we talked about how even though you may appreciate the layout and design of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, there are some advantages to using those same apps in the Google Workspace. And when I say same, I probably should say similar. Google Docs, Google Sheets, and Google Slides, to name the big three. Some of the benefits that we talked about in our training session was that using Google, it's accessible from any device, any location, regardless of where you are. You've got all of your things at your fingertips, and you can pick up where you left off. You know, years ago, before we had Google, it was a very, tedious workflow to create a Word doc, edit it, save it, attach it to an email, go wherever you were going, open the email, download it, open it back in whatever program, Word, edit it, save those changes, reattach it. I mean, like a million steps rather than just open it, work on it, and it's already saved and ready to go. So accessibility is huge. The ability to autosave is another one. All of your changes, including every keystroke, are saved in Google. Real-time collaboration. You can pull in people from within your organization or outside of your organization, to be able to work on a document for you or with you. You can see who viewed your files in Google and the last time they were viewed. You can also see who changed your file and specifically what they changed and when. When you're storing things in Google Drive, you're not taking up space on your actual computer. And similarly, you don't have to worry that you're going to lose all of your stuff. I mean, if you're a person who saves everything to your desktop or locally on your computer and you don't have it saved anywhere other than there, if your hard drive fails or something happens to your laptop for whatever reason, you're going to lose all of those files. There is no retrieval method for them. And then the last one we talked about was how everything that you create in Google has a version history or a revision history tied to it. So you can go back in time and see every change that was made. You can roll changes to the current state of the document. You can copy and paste changes from, maybe an earlier point in time. You could roll those to the front. So those are 7 reasons why it is helpful to start thinking about using Google, even if you feel like you are really tied to the Microsoft Office suite. Up front, it will certainly take some time to get used to using docs instead of Word, or sheets instead of numbers or Excel and slides. And for some things, like in Excel specifically, you may not want to use sheets. And so there may be very valid reasons why you're not converting everything into Google. But where you can, you definitely should start moving in that direction. In terms of using Chrome versus Firefox, we have some Firefox and other browser users across the district. Chrome is created by Google. Therefore, Google Workspace works the cleanest and the best in Google Chrome. There are some more advanced features within the Google Workspace that work in Google Chrome that do not work in other browsers. For example, within Gmail and Calendar, you have some advanced features in Chrome with those apps that you don't necessarily have in the other parts of Google. With the other browsers such as Firefox or Safari. our district in particular had always had a caveat when it came to what to put in Google. And we used to say anything with personally identifiable information should not be put in Google. But as we moved ahead, as Google Workspace became more secure, as we started using things like Google Classroom, those pieces definitely got muddied. And we learned over time that it isn't really, necessarily what you're putting in Google Drive. It has a lot to do with applying the correct permissions to those files. There's actually a lot that you can do, and we're going to talk about. There's a lot you can do to secure a file in Google Drive and limit people's access. So when we get to sharing permissions, we'll definitely talk about that. But as a district, our long-term goal is to be moving everything from our S drives or our N drives into our Google Drive, and organizing things in one central place. Because if you think about it, we currently have an S drive that we organize things in, an N drive potentially if you have an N drive, your email where we organize things, your Google Drive, and then your actual computer. You might have an organizational system. So trying to keep track of what's where, what's been updated and what hasn't is kind of a nightmare. So the goal is to have one central place in your Google Drive where you could store all of your stuff. And that way it's super accessible, but restricted when it needs to be, and it's all in one place. We talked about how Google Drive is really like a filing cabinet. Just like you have files and folders, the same is true in your Google Drive. Google Drive you can think of as basically a central repository to organize the files and folders that you create. Google Drive is kind of like the actual filing cabinet with stuff inside. You can access your Google Drive in multiple ways. The way that most of us probably go is by going to Google and clicking on the waffle menu, going to Google Drive. Anywhere across Google Workspace, you can type in a keyword and then an ending, google.com, and it will take you wherever that first part is suggesting. So if I do drive.google.com, I would go to my Google Drive. If I go to classroom.google.com, it will take me to Google Classroom. If I go to news.google.com, it will take me to Google's News page. So that's another way that you can navigate Google Workspace, is just by typing in those URLs. You could bookmark them. You might have a Google Drive bookmark that you can just click on to get easily to your Google Drive. And the same is true of the other apps as well. And then the last way that we talked about was installing a client on your computer called Google Drive for Desktop, which allows sort of a middle ground between the cloud storage and your local computer storage. So we'll talk about Google Drive for Desktop as we move throughout this video. But for now, just know that's a fourth way that you could access your stuff in Google Drive as well. In terms of being signed in, when I'm in Google Chrome, I know that I'm signed into the Chrome browser because I can see my profile picture. And if I hover over it, you can see my name pop up. I have all of my extensions with me. And to see all of my extensions, I can click on, the ones that are pinned, plus the ones that exist in the puzzle piece are additional extensions in Chrome. And then you should also have your bookmarks here as well. If you're seeing a word like update or paused, those are things that you should click on and remedy so that you can run the fullest version of Chrome. Because when you're paused, you're probably not seeing certain things that you should be seeing. And obviously update, you're probably also not seeing everything you should be seeing. So really quickly, to take a tour of Google Drive, we'll go down the left-hand side and then we'll go across the top. On the left, you have the big New button. This is where we'll come to create a lot of things in our Google Drives. We have this priority button, and to talk about priority, this is something that's relatively new in Google Workspace, and you'll notice that I have suggested files here as well, similar to the same way that I do in my Google Drive. Suggested just means these are the last 4 files that I opened and edited or viewed, and it's just suggesting them to me so that I can easily and quickly locate them if I need them again. It's assuming that since I needed it once, I might need them again. But what priority really is created for was down here at the bottom where you see these workspaces. So if I create a workspace, you could give it a name and hit create, and it would look just like the one that I have here for Google Training. To add things to the workspace, you would actually go into your drive and you would find a file. Curious if I can do this with a folder. Do I have an add to workspace? It does not appear that I do. So let's click on a file instead. So let's say I wanted to add this breakout template to a workspace. I would have this add to workspace button. And you can see that if it wasn't already in this workspace, I would be able to put it in my Google Training workspace, or I could create a new one right from here. Let's try a different one. So I'm going to add to workspace, and I'm going to click on Google Training Admin Secretaries. File added to workspace. So now when I go back to priority, you can see that there's all of these files on the workspace, and then I can view 2 additional. So these are all the things. This is the one I just added today, right now. There's all these things on my workspace. To me, a workspace is like a folder, but rather than having to click into the folder, I can kind of see most of the contents right here. But I also had to click here to get to my additional files. So I personally do not use, but I could understand why you might. And that's essentially how you use priority. My Drive is the original component of Google Drive. It is anything that you have created in Google. It's all of the stuff that you own and you organize where you would like it. When I click on my Drive, I can scroll through it over here to the right, or I can click this drop down button to access and just go into a specific folder. Right? So if I wanted to go into my Adobe Spark folder and I clicked it, now what comes up over here is what was in that folder. And I could click the drop down to button it back up again. Shared drives we'll come back to. Shared with me is anything that other people have created and shared with me. This shared with me section reminds me of a social media feed, because you can't really control what's on your social media feed in the same way that you can't really control who shares stuff with you in this section of Google. So keep in mind that the goal of Shared With Me is not to clear it out and delete everything in there. It's really to pull out what you need and put it where you want it so that you can find it when you need it. Recent is basically automated by Google. You don't have to do anything to Recent, and you can't add anything to Recent. Recent is just a list of stuff that you opened today, earlier this week, earlier this month, and so on and so forth. Okay, it just keeps going back in time. So this is in an effort to also help you find things. If you know that you used it within the last week or so, you should easily be able to scroll from the top and see what's there. Starred is similar. When I click on Starred, anything from my drive that, and this you can do with folders, anything from my drive that I added to Starred will appear in this Starred menu. The purpose of Starred was to just star the most essential files that you have so that it was like a smaller group of things that you need most often. Periodically, you definitely need to go back and unstar things so that it doesn't look like mine. Mine has way too many things starred that it's not even that helpful anymore. But one thing to note in both recent and starred is that you can't add any folders to either of these places to try and organize those sections. Trash, anytime you delete something, you can drag and drop it and put it in trash. You can right-click it and put it in trash. Once it's here, it will stay here for 30 days, unless you come in and actually empty your trash. And you can see the delete forever. Okay. Across the top, we've got our search bar. When I want to try to find things across all parts of my drive, I can type a name in, and I could try to search by the owner, or I could try to search by the title. Over here on the right is a set of search filters. So this is often helpful because if I don't know the title, but I know that it was a document, or I know that it was a PDF, I could put that in. Also, if I know the specific person who owns the PDF, I could type their name in. And then when I hit search, it'll only show me the PDFs that were owned by this person across all parts of my Google Drive. So it quickly filters down to a very small set of documents that I can easily then look through if I don't know the exact title. Over here on the right, you may not have this check mark. This is a setting in your Google Drive which allows you to turn on offline access for all contents of your Google Drive. So by enabling the setting, if I were somewhere and didn't have internet, I could still access all of this information and I could still edit it. It'll store the changes for me offline until I'm back online, and then it'll push those changes to my Google Drive to make all of those syncs across. The support button is everywhere in Google. Every Google Workspace app you go to has the little question mark. When you click on it, there is some very helpful things in the question mark that's worth noting. One is help and support. If you have a specific question, there are resources here that you could find answers. This help and support is specific to Google Drive. It depends which app you're in, and then it will pertain to that app. Training is also a great one. If you click on the training tab wherever you are, notice that these training documents all pertain to Google Drive specifically, but everything from like an overview of the basics to cheat sheets to tips and videos. What I also like is if you scroll down, every app has its own training course that Google put together. So if you click on the training course, you can click to enroll, and it'll ask you to sign in to your Google account, and then it'll take you through these different modules where you're learning about that app. The other thing I think that is helpful is you can click on updates to see the most recent updates to that particular app in Google. And then there's also a place where you can send feedback as well. The settings gear allows you to change settings in your Google Drive. Here's my app launcher or my waffle menu. This allows me to go to different places across the Google Workspace quickly and easily. And then down below, this is probably also worth mentioning. I have this list layout. Right now mine is in grid layout, but a lot of people do like the list layout better. So if I tap on that, you can see how all of my stuff is now in a list. And I have some filter options. So if I don't want it to go alphabetical from A to Z, I could switch that. I can just look at the documents based on the last time I modified them or the last ones that I opened. So you have some options with the list view that you don't necessarily have with the folder view and the grid view. And one of the last things to point out is actually over here on the right-hand side of your Google Drive, you have some shortcuts to things like this is an easy way to get to your calendar. This is an easy way to get to another Google app called Google Keep. This is another easy way to get to your tasks and to create tasks. But as I go down in the different Google Workspace apps, you end up having different things that can show up here. So notice when I hover over this plus sign, it asks me for something called add-ons. That's something we'll talk about much later in these videos. The add-ons enhance the functionality of a Google Workspace app. So for example, in Docs, I can get a mail merge add-on. When I click on the add-on, which is over here, it allows me to complete a mail merge by using some sort of a Google Sheet into a Google document. The last part of Drive that we need to talk about are shared drives. So we already mentioned how my drives are things that you own, and shared with me drives are things that other people own but have shared with you. These are the only two parts of Google Drive originally. A couple years ago, Google created these shared drives, and the reason for that was, somebody might share with me tons of stuff. Maybe they're on my team and we go back and forth all the time, but then that person either leaves the district or they retire, whatever, for whatever reason, their account, once it's no longer activated, all of the stuff that they own is also deactivated along with it, which presented a lot of problems for people. So Google came up with something called a shared drive, and shared drives are like a folder, but like a whole filing system. But anytime you put something in this filing system, it is no longer owned by anyone other than the actual shared drive. So as people come and go from an organization or a team, the shared drives stay intact with all of the documentation inside it. And for that reason, as a district, it would be helpful if each school had at least, like each office, had a shared drive with all of the collective documentation organized inside. Within a shared drive, you can have people who manage the shared drive and who contribute to the contents of the shared drive. You can also just have people who view certain folders in the shared drive. There's a distinction to be made between, top-level shared drive access and access to potentially a folder. So you don't need to have everybody who's on a shared drive shared at the highest level. You could just share individual folders with them. All right, so that's a quick overview of Google Drive. Let's dive in a little bit deeper to how you would actually create and organize files. All right, so to create a new file in your Google Drive, you would want to click on the New button, and you could pick any type of document you wanted to create, a doc, a sheet, a slide, etc. So I'm going to click on the doc, and notice that it opens the document, and up here at the top, I can create a title or a name for the document. So I'm just going to call this Test Doc 1. Additionally, let's say I was in my Google Drive here. You know what, I'm actually going to do something real quick to make this easier to find. I'm going to put a 1 in front of Test Doc 1 because anything numerical will show up at the front of my Google Drive after my folders, of course. So here we go. Here's my Test Doc 1. I could also rename Test Doc 1 or give it a title, for example, if I right-click on it. Depending on what the right-click command is on your computer, you would right-click on the title, and then notice that you have so many functions that come up when you right-click. You could click Rename, and then you could change the name of your document. The other thing that I talked about in one of our trainings was that Google across the workspace allows you to add emojis to any file or folder name. And it just gives a visual so that people can also see what that file is about. So I use something called Emojipedia, but there's lots of other ones that you could use. And Emojipedia is super easy. So for Test Doc 1, let's see what comes up. All right, I'm going to use this push pin. So you would click on the emoji you want to use, and you would just simply hit the copy button. So I'm tapping on the copy button. I'm coming back to my document, and wherever you would go to rename it, you're just going to tap into the naming box, the text box, and you can paste in your emoji. All right, so I'm going to refresh. I'm going to refresh. And now you can see that my test doc 1 has the little push pin after the name. What I like about doing it after the name is that it keeps it alphabetically where I expect it to be. If I put the push pin to the front, it wants to put all the things with emojis before all the numbers alphabetically in my Google Drive. And that just gets a little bit confusing. So I always think it is better to put the emoji at the end of the name. Totally your preference though. So now that I've created my document and I've named it, the next thing I might want to do is share it. And again, if I'm just coming into my Google Drive, I can right click and I can go to share, or if I actually open the document, I can click on the share button over to the right hand side. Notice that by default, an individual file that you created is private only to you until you share it. So if I click on the share button, I get a box that looks like this. This box doesn't really look like it has a lot to it, but it does. So let's talk about all the different options that we have when we share something. Number 1, I can add a person or I can add a group to my document. If I want to add a person, I just simply type their name. And then I'm going to define the level of permission that they should have. Notice that I have editor is what comes up as the default. An editor is the greatest set of permissions on a file or folder. It not only allows them to edit the actual document, but they can also add additional people to the document. So they can share the document on to others, which is important for you to keep in mind. If there's any kind of sensitive information in your document, you may not want to have a lot of editors who can then share it on from there. You could make them a commenter, which means obviously they can see the document, but they can also leave comments for people, and they can see other people's comments that were made to the same document. Or you could choose viewer, which means they could view the document but not comment or edit. This is a relatively new feature that's awesome. It's helpful for us to keep this in mind when we're sharing, which is that you can add an expiration. So maybe I want this person to be able to edit the document for a period of time, but I don't need them to have access forever. And I don't need to have to remember to go back in and manually remove their access. I can have Google automate that and automatically take away their access after a certain day. So if I click on the pencil, notice that it always wants to go out probably about a month. I can dial back. Maybe I only want them to have access until next Wednesday, the 22nd. So now this student is an editor on this test doc until next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. And then Google will know to automatically remove their access to the document. The notify box, if it's checked, which it is by default, will allow you to email people and let them know that you're sharing this with them. Even if you don't put a message, an email will still be generated, but you can also type a message so that they know what you're sending and what the expectation is that they're supposed to do with it. Okay, let's swing back over here to these 3 sets of permissions. Right now I have tester student set to an editor whose edit access expires on February 22nd. Depending again on the information that's in this document, I could come up here to my settings. These are advanced share settings that only pertain to this particular document. notice that they are turned on by default. So every time you create a document or folder, these things are turned on. And it's up to you to turn them off if you don't want them. One of the things that we already talked about was that editors had the ability to not only edit the document, but they could change permissions, and they could share the document to other people and define their level of permission. If you do not want editors to be able to share the document with others, you can uncheck this box. Additionally, if the people you're sharing with are viewers and commenters, depending on the information within the document, you may not want viewers and commenters to see a download option, a print option, or a make a copy option. And so you could uncheck this so that anybody who's a viewer and commenter, they really can only view what's in front of them. They can't do anything other than that. You just hit the back button, and now those settings will stay applied to this document. So now I'm sharing this with Tester Student. Tester Student is an editor, but they're an editor who can't actually add any more people to this document, and their access is going to expire next week, or whenever I set that parameter. So you can start to see how I can control the level of access that people have to things. And it's important to kind of consider the nature of the document and to what extent I might need to bundle those permissions to maintain the security of the document or the folder. Lastly, before I hit send, let's talk about this copy link function. Okay, in order to do that, I'm going to come back a menu here to this. Right now, since I didn't actually share that with my tester student, right now I'm the only person on this document. Okay, if I come back to tester, right, I'll add tester just so we can see it. We'll add our expiration real quick for next week. These are already turned off, so I'm going to go ahead and send this to tester student. All right, so now when I come in, you can see that tester student is an editor, but there's a time limit. Notice that down here in the bottom, you have this general access section. General access allows you to not have to type individual names or groups of people into a document. You can open the document to anybody within the entire district, or even beyond the district, anybody who has this link from anywhere across the world could see the contents contained within this document. I would caution you, depending on the nature of the document, I would caution you to using these 3 modes of general access. Well, really 2. Restricted, if you keep it restricted, you can send somebody the link, but the only 2 people who are going to be able to open the link without getting a permission error is myself and tester student right now. So the safest way to share the document is to add people or to add groups. Let's talk about groups. So in the same way that we add groups and send emails to them, we can add entire groups of people that we want to have the same sharing permissions, so that anybody who's contained within this group, and if I hover, you can see that it's made up of individual, like smaller groups within of individual teams, and then also individual people as well. All of these people and all of these groups would have the same level of permission. So in that way, I can control the security of the document to huge groups of people without, necessarily needing to open it up to everybody across the district. So when you're sharing something, I think your first plan of attack would be to try to capture as many people as you can up here. Unless the document is such that you want the whole district to see it, or you want the public and the community to be able to see it, then you would want to open it up beyond, just individual people and groups. So once I choose an access point, I can also set what the level of access is. I can say that, people with this link, when they click on it, they're just viewers. Or I'm going to grant anybody with the link the ability to comment, or anybody with the link the ability to edit. Okay. Then what I would do from here is I would copy the link. Notice it says link copied. And I would send that link, or I would post it somewhere for people to access. Whenever, as long as they were in our district, they could click on the link and they could see, as a viewer, they could see the document, since that's the permission level that I gave here. Right? But again, depending on what it is, you would most definitely want to keep it restricted if it has any kind of confidential information in there. Okay, so I'm going to click done. Those are the sharing permissions, and those are sort of the steps that I would go through to decide what kinds of permissions you're going to use to surround a document. If you uncheck this box, it will not send a notification email. So most of the time you'll want to check the box so people have a heads up. But if you didn't, and they went to their shared with me, they would see that document in their shared with me from you. All right, so we talked about how you could change the level of access and send out a link to a document. Along those lines, there's a couple things that you can do with link sharing. One, if you come into File, and this is across the Google Workspace, you can click on Share, and you can click on this button that says Publish to the Web. When I click Publish to the Web, I have two options. I can generate a link if I'm going to send that to someone, or I can generate an embed code for this document, which would allow me to embed this document into a website. Most of the time, you're going to use the link option. We're going to click Publish. Google's going to ask if you want to publish this selection, so you're okaying that. You're publishing it to the web. Notice that it just popped up a link in this box, and at the end of the link, it has a pub extension at the end. So this document is now published. And you'll see a difference in a second when we look at what this document now looks like when it is published to the web. But if I click this drop down, I also have some additional settings that I can set on a document or on a sheet or on a slide that I publish to the web. One, I could stop publishing altogether and turn it off. Two, even though I have a published link, depending on who I want to view it, I can restrict access to viewing that public link by making sure that only people within the district can see it. And the other piece here is, by default, you notice that this box is checkmarked. That means that when I make a change to the document, if I keep this box checked, it's going to automatically republish those changes, so that the people who are looking at the link are always looking at the most recent version. If you uncheck this and make changes, you would have to republish the document in order to push those changes to the published doc. Right? So I would make sure I copy that whole link. Once we move to Gmail, you should be able to just click on Gmail, paste the published link, and send it to whomever you would like to send it to. But notice the difference when I post this link. You're not going to see all of these toolbars. You're going to see the exact same document, but you no longer see the toolbars at the top. So let's see, I'm going to throw some content in there. Okay, so notice how the viewer of a published document has no controls. There's no toolbars. They literally just have a view-only access, like a website. So it's basically just informational. yet the links are still live, so they can click on things that might have been embedded or linked within that document. So that's the publish to the web option. Similarly, I'm going to close this. I'm going to come back to our document that we created. Similarly, if I don't publish to the web, so I'll stop publishing. I can also just simply change the ending. I'm going to take away the word edit in my URL up here, and I'm going to replace it with the word preview. If I send this link, it's got my document plus the word preview. If I send this out, people see something very similar to publish to the web. They don't have controls. They really just have a view only of the document with embedded links. But the one thing I don't have when I use that is I don't have any of those sharing permissions that I may have had, initially. So once somebody gets this link, as soon as I make changes, they pretty much always have access to the document. Unless I make a copy of the document and change the URL so that they no longer have access. The nice thing about publishing to the web is, just like I did on here, I can come into share and I can stop publishing. So you have some more control over a document when you publish to the web, but depending on what it is you're trying to share, the preview function and just putting the word preview at the end will get a pretty close view to the publish to the web function. One thing to point out too with publish to the web is if you publish a slideshow, like a Google Slides project, to the web, you have controls where you can determine how long each slide displays, whether you want the presentation to loop through again. And so yeah, you can set up like a full-on automated presentation that's just going to go without needing to be clicked by you. Okay, another way that you can create a file. So far we talked about how you can click on New and create an individual file. Another way that you can do that is by making a copy of something that somebody sends to you. So in order to make a copy, let's say I wanted to add a copy here. I would right-click on it and make a copy, or you could open the document and you could go to File, Make a Copy. It would be the same thing. When you make a copy, you are doing a couple things. You are making an exact copy of a document. So now, instead of having one of that file, wherever it just went, I now have two, one called copy of and one called copy of copy. So this is the one that I just made the copy of. When you make a copy, it's important to know that if the one original that you just copied from was shared with other people, this is owned by you and is no longer shared with those same people. So if I go back to my original copy of District Zoom account, if any changes get made to the original, my copy will not be updated. I literally have a separate copy. If I want, I could share this with a different set of people, or maybe the same set of people for different reasons. But this copy is now owned by me, and it is not connected in any way, shape, or form to the previous one. So that's something to keep in mind when you make copies. The one thing I would not do, if you're a person who makes copies of things and shared with me, I would not make copies of things in here to store unless it's like a template that you want to use and make your own. But for anything that you are wanting to stay tethered to so that you see the most recent changes to it, I would not make a copy. We'll talk about how you can take stuff out of shared with me and store it in your drive by organizing it. If you right click and go to add shortcut to drive. That's a better method than making a copy. Along the lines, though, of making a copy, when you're the person who's sharing, in the same way that we added the word preview to the end, you can force someone else to make a copy of a document that they don't need to have edit access to. So if I change the word preview to copy, and I send out this URL, the people receiving and clicking on this URL will be prompted with this. So before they can even view the contents, it will force them to make their own copy of test.1. Okay? The other way that people force copies is when they go into the sharing permissions, they will make somebody an editor. They'll make somebody a viewer. And that way, when this person comes in, if they want to be able to change or tweak the document, they'll know that they have to come in and file, make a copy to be able to edit their own version. So you can either make people a viewer and they might come in and make their own copy, or you can change the URL, change from edit to copy, and send out this link to prompt them to force the copy. Make a copy is a great function because it allows you to use something that somebody has already created and make it your own. So you don't always have to start from scratch. Okay? Along similar lines, we've talked about a couple ways that you can start from scratch, but I wanted to show you that there are template galleries stored in Google Workspace that we probably don't even know exist. So if I'm in my Google Drive and I come over to the waffle, notice that Drive is like a conglomeration, if you will, of docs, sheets, slides, PDFs, and other things. But notice that Docs has its own app, Sheets has its own app, Slides has its own app. These are basically ways that you can see just the docs in your Google Drive, just the sheets in your Google Drive, just the slides in your Google Drive. But when you go into these individual apps, there's also a template gallery built into them so that you don't always have to start from scratch. So if I go into Docs, okay, these are all my docs, but at the top you have a template gallery. And if you click to expand that, you'll notice that there's a Northwestern Lehigh library, which we don't really use. And that's fine. We have other ways that we can share these templates with each other. And then we have the General. So if you click on the General tab, these are all templates that Google has created with docs. And so if you tap on one, there are like newsletters and brochures. If I open one, notice that it automatically opens it in my drive. It gives me the ability to edit it. And now I can use this template and change whatever I want. I can change the image, I can change the font colors, sizes, you name it. Okay. The same thing is true if I come back to Drive and I go to Sheets. Here's the template gallery, General, and then you'll notice that there's lots of templates in here. Not as many in here as there were for docs, but there may be something of interest that you could use and adapt from there. And the same would hold true for slides as well. So it might be worth it just to kind of peruse those three areas to see if there's anything worth keeping or worth editing. But that's another way that you can, bring files into Drive. If you're not creating new, somebody might be sharing them with you and you might be making a copy of something that is a template that you want to use, or you could go into the individual template galleries and click on things that will automatically then be stored, here's my newsletter, in your actual Google Drive. All right, so in the same way that we created files, we can also create folders. Keeping Google Drive organized is all about folder and subfolder creation, but it's very easy to create both. So in the same way that we created files, we can click on New, and then we can click on New Folder. In the same way that we named a file, we can give our folder a name. Remember, we talked about adding emojis. By going to Emojipedia, you could add an emoji after the folder name, and it will be visible to anybody who has access to your folder. Similar to the test folder that I created here, which I'm actually going to remove. Okay, so here's my test folder. The first thing to point out is that there's no little person icon on the folder, which means that this folder is not shared currently with anybody other than myself. If I want to share the folder, I can right-click and I can click on Share. It brings up the same share box as when you share a document. So if I wanted to share this with my test student, for example, remember that it always defaults to the highest level of permissions, and that editors can add other people to the folder. So what you think you might be sharing with one editor could become more than one editor if they share that on and loop other people into this content. You can add an expiration. You can also click on the advanced share settings, and you can prevent editors from sharing it with others by unchecking this box. You have your email notification and message. You can send this entire folder as a link. Remember that unless you change the access, only people that it's directly shared with would be able to access the restricted link to open the folder. You can change it to a much larger group by putting it at Northwestern High School District or anybody with the link. Notice that when you come to advanced share settings, you don't have the ability to restrict someone's printing, downloading, or making a copy, but that's because all of those functions are irrelevant when it comes to folders. You cannot print a folder, download a folder, or copy a folder. All right, so I am actually going to share this with my test student, and I'll make my test student an editor. Notice that the icon on my folder now has the little person on it. And my next step would be to add some stuff to my test folder. So in order to do that, I'm going to open test folder, and I'm going to click on whatever type of document I want to add. I'll just create the doc. It's verifying that not only do I want to create it, but it's a shared folder. So am I okay sharing that with the people who are also on that folder? Once I do that, I can give the document a name, and if I come over to my share settings here, you'll notice that even though I didn't actually share it with anybody, it's already shared with tester student. Tester student is an editor on the file because tester was an editor or is an editor at the higher level, which is the folder level. So keep that in mind, that if you have people on your folder, the permissions of everything that you put in that file, that folder, become visible or editable by those collaborators. If I didn't want tester to be an editor on this particular document, I could always manually change it. I could manually remove their access. It's just a lot to remember if there's multiple files in the folder and multiple people that the folder is shared to. So it's just something to be aware of. The other thing to note is we talked about add expiration, but I can transfer ownership of this document to my test student. That means that I would no longer own the file. They would, and therefore if ever I deleted or deactivated my Google account, they would still retain access to that file as owners. And then I could also remove access as well. So the first way that you can add files to your folder is by opening the folder and creating a new file. The second way that you can add files to your folder is by using these little drop downs over on the left-hand side of your screen. So, for example, when I click this, notice that it expands my Google Drive into all the folders that I currently have in there. So now if I want to organize my Google Drive by moving something into a folder, into my test folder, I can just simply find my test folder and I can drag a file over and drop it in there. Notice that it also reminds you anybody who has access to your folder will be able to see this file. As long as you're good with that, you can say move, and now I've got two files in my test folder, the one I created new and the one that I just drug over. Coming back to the new button, there's a couple more buttons, the only two we haven't talked about yet. You could also bring files into this folder by doing a file upload or a folder upload. If you do a file upload, it's going to take you outside of Google to your computer and the other drives that you may have access to, like S drive, N drive, and you'll be able to upload things right into that folder. So for example, I'm on my desktop and I'm going to upload this PDF. Once you upload, you should see this black upload box pop up. It kind of shows you the progress of what's being uploaded, and then it gives you a green check mark when it's finished. So now in my test folder, I have all three of these things, all of which are editable or viewable by the people who are on that folder. Just note, as we're talking about uploading things, and I saw a couple things on my desktop that are kind of, different file types. I brought in a PDF, and when I click on a PDF, Google Drive knows what to do with PDFs. So you get this PDF viewer with the black background. I can't edit or do anything with it in this state, but I can at least read it, view it, etc. But if I were to upload a file type, like a WAV file, for example, I could click to open, and Google will bring the WAV file. When I click on the WAV file, depending on how big it is, it might not be immediately available.
Hi, Kelly.
It'll actually play, that was a voicemail message that I had downloaded from my email, but it'll actually play the WAV file. So there's a lot of file types that aren't your standard doc, sheets, and slides, or PowerPoints, for example, that Google knows what to do with it. But then there's a bunch of file types as well, like this flip chart here, that Google will store for you. I'll do a file upload. It'll upload the flip chart just fine, but it'll give me this generic icon, and if I click on it, it'll tell me that no preview is available. Just be aware that just like your filing cabinet, which is not digital, I can literally store anything in my Google Drive. I can store any file type in my Google Drive. There's a bunch of file types that Google will recognize and be able to open. So even though this flip chart is now in my Google Drive, no preview available just means that it's so specific that Google Drive doesn't have the capability to preview what's in there. If I want to view this digital calendar flip chart, I can click the download button and I can open it with the appropriate software on my computer so that I could see and edit that file. So just know, as you're starting to transfer things to your Google Drive, you can store anything in here using the ways that we're talking about. It's just you might not have a preview available. And you might have a generic icon if Google doesn't know how to treat that file. So similar to a file upload is a folder upload. And so when I click on folders, notice I'm on my desktop again, but all the individual files here are grayed out because this is only going to allow me to grab a folder. So if I click on a folder, it has 3 files in it. I'm going to upload the whole folder. Notice I can't really even, at this stage of the game, I can't determine which files are going to come and stay in that folder. It's either all, or I have to pick a different folder. All or none. So when I click upload, it just verifies that I'm going to be uploading 3 files to the site. Those are the 3 files that we saw in the folder. And this is showing me the progress again. 1, 2, depending on how big your files are and how many, this could take a while. All right, so my folder's done. And notice that it has the shared icon because, again, it's shared with the people at the upper level folder, the root folder. When I click here, these are the files that were in the folder. So again, I have, in this case, I have a video file, which Google's going to need time to process, but eventually Google will show you the video. You won't have to re-download that in order to see it. It gives me my Google Doc, and it also gives me an audio file, which if I click on this, it will play the audio in the same way that it played the WAV file. One other thing to point out is that as I was doing those file and folder uploads, you'll notice that my desktop is a mess, but that's not what I was going to point out. You will notice that those files that I transferred, like the digital flip chart, the digital calendar flip chart, where would you be? And the NGSX flyer. All right, here's the flip chart. Good Lord, move that over. They're all still in their original locations as well. So when you're uploading things, you're not deleting them, you're not physically moving them, you're actually copying them into another location, for good or bad. But just keep in mind that those original files are still there. Same thing with the folder that I transferred, it's still here. It still has all 3 files in it on my desktop. So you may want to leave them, you may want to clean them up. But the other thing to keep in mind is that once you start transferring things to Google Drive, you want to make sure that you're editing them here and not editing the copies, because now you're going to have to transfer again in order to get the most recent version, within your Google Drive. There is a piece to this that we didn't talk about yet that will help all of that, and it's called Google Drive for Desktop. In a little bit, I'll talk about how you can use it, but when you sync files with Google Drive for Desktop, if you make changes in the original location, it will automatically sync those changes to your Google Drive. And so we'll talk about how to sync files with Google Drive for Desktop and what that looks like. The other way that you can upload, if you're not going to use these two, is you could use the drag and drop method. So if I scooch this over, right, and I bring this file over, I can drag and drop it, which is essentially the same thing as using a file upload. Right. I want to draw your attention to the file that I just brought in, which is this file here, and I want to draw your attention to a Google Drive setting that you should be aware of. So in your settings, let me bring my window back here. In my settings, by default, this box for you should be unclicked. What this box will do, if you click it, which is what I had mine turned on to be, is it will convert everything that you upload to Google to a Google Docs editor format. So that means if you're using Microsoft Word and you upload to Google, if you have this checked, it'll automatically change it from a Word file, like a doc file or a docx file, to a Google Doc. If you have a Excel file, an XLS, it'll convert it to a sheet, Google Sheet. If you have a PowerPoint, it'll convert it automatically to a Google Slide. So I'm going to do the same exact thing with my folder. Oops, but I want to uncheck that setting, and I'll show you what the difference is. So, I currently have this Rissel Spring 23 file in here, uploaded. My checkbox was set in my settings, and it converted it to a Google Doc. Now I turned that setting off, and I'm going to take the same file, which is actually a docx file, and I'm going to upload it. Notice that I get that blue outline and the blue up arrow. Then I can just let it go, and you'll notice that I now have the same file, but with a slightly different icon. So if you don't keep this setting checked, if it's unchecked like mine is currently, when you bring things in, it will still convert to a Word compatible Google file. It's still going to change the formatting. It's still going to change the layout depending on what kind of elements you had in that doc file. The formatting issues that will arise happen regardless of whether you keep that setting unchecked or you check the setting and turn it into a Google Doc. So formatting aside, there is one big difference between these two files. Even though this is now a Word compatible Google Doc, notice that it's taking a second to be able to open it. I can now, I can share it, I can track a revision history, I can add collaborators, I can do everything I can do in the Google Doc version. The only difference is, you'll notice I'm missing a menu bar here. So let me go into my actual Google Doc. Notice that I have this extensions. So the only difference between the Word compatible doc and the Google Doc is that I can't go into Google Workspace Marketplace and download add-ons and extensions that will kind of enhance the functionality of those documents. I can use every other part of the Google Workspace with this except for that. So that's just something to be aware of as you start transferring and deciding whether to convert or not convert your files to true Google documents. If I decide that I want to take any of my Word compatible files or Office compatible files, and I want to convert it, if I go to File, on those Word compatible ones, you'll have Save as Google Docs. Same thing with Excel files, you'll have like Save as Google Sheet, so on and so forth. Once I click this, it's going to convert this into a completely separate Google file that is completely a Google Doc. But what I end up with is a duplicate of this only as a full Google Doc. So when you use the Save as Google Docs function, you end up with two copies of the same thing, one that's Word compatible, your original, and one that it just made into a full Google Doc. So you'll just have to make sure that you account for that and maybe delete the one that you don't want. Okay? Alright, so now we know how to add a folder, and we know how to put lots of different stuff in that folder. If we want to add a subfolder to our original test folder, once we have test folder open, we can come to New Folder, and we could add a subfolder within there. Same thing, you see the little person icon. Keep in mind that the same people who are on test folder can now see subfolder. And if I want to transfer items to my subfolder, I can do this in the same exact way. I could move entire folders into my subfolder. This is actually going to move the file. I could create a new subfolder again within a subfolder. And within my subfolder, I could always do another folder upload or file upload into this subfolder. So subfolders pretty much follow the same pattern of creation, naming, and sharing as we did with the folder structure. You're just adding it to an already existing folder, either by creating new, dragging and dropping, or doing like a folder upload. One thing I didn't mention, and just worth pointing out, is that you'll notice that some of my folders are color-coded, and if you want to color-code your folders, you can just simply right-click on a folder and go to Change Color, and then you could pick a color for your folder. Note that if you make a folder a certain color, the other people who are shared on that folder do not see the folder color. It stays gray for them, and then they can choose their own color scheme for however it works in their Google Drive. Another really handy way to add files to folders is by using something called a shortcut. And this is something that you can use across Google Workspace. It works in My Drive, shortcuts work into shared drives, and shortcuts also work in Shared With Me. In fact, in Shared With Me, this is the method that you would use to really clean up your Shared With Me. So rather than moving and making copies of files and trying to clean this up, if I right-click on a file, for example, maybe I really think it would be helpful to keep this welcome back info in my drive. I don't want to have to keep scrolling through Shared With Me or searching for it to find it. I can right-click on the file and go Add Shortcut to Drive. Whenever you add a shortcut to Drive, it brings up this menu, and you actually have to click this over arrow to get to your folders. So let's say in the Welcome Back, I wanted to keep it where I would look for it in my drive, which for now is just going to be in my test folder. Notice that it kept the document in Shared With Me, but if I go to my test folder, I now have this Welcome Back presentation here as well, with the little shortcut arrow indicating that it's kind of tethered to a different file. The advantage to using shortcuts is that I'm still getting the most recent changes to a shortcut document. So whoever was the owner of that file in the Shared With Me, whenever they make changes to that Welcome Back slideshow, I will still see the most current version by opening up my shortcut in the folder where I put it. The other nice thing about shortcuts is that you can put a shortcut to something in more than one folder. So if I had multiple folders, maybe like certain people only have access to certain folders, but I needed multiple groups to be able to see those items, I could right-click again and add another shortcut to Drive in another folder. So this is an advantage over making a copy in a lot of ways, because it's still shared with the same people as the original, and like I said, you'll still get those changes. This is also true of files that you might have in your drive that you want to maybe put in shared folders. So earlier, I kind of demoed how you could drag and drop a file to put it in a folder, but that moves the file. Maybe you want a file to exist in a certain organizational structure for yourself, but you also want other people to have access to it in their shared folders. So if I use the shortcut from files in my drive, I can move the file as a shortcut into my test folder. It will always ask, because I'm moving it into a shared folder, it'll ask, do I want to share it with tester student? Because tester student is on the folder. Tester student might just be a viewer, he could be a commenter, or an editor. Or maybe you're putting this in the folder, but you don't want tester student to have access. Right, so I'm going to add the shortcut. I'm just going to let tester be a viewer. So now when I come in, here's the file that I added from Shared With Me as a shortcut. Here's the file that I added from my drive as a shortcut. And again, on any of these files, even though they follow the permissions of the folder, I could always manually edit the share permissions. Here's my tester student. If I don't want tester student on it here, I could remove access. Additionally, you can add shortcuts to shared drives as well. So it kind of defeats the purpose of a shared drive, which I'll talk about. But remember that a shared drive was created, and the reason that Google created them was so that there really is no owner of the stuff. The stuff is owned by the actual shared drive. So if all the members of the shared drive leave, the stuff will still remain until somebody else new is added to the shared drive. The stuff just sits there in this central filing cabinet. So if I wanted from my drive if I wanted to come in and shortcut to a shared drive, I could take a file and I can add it to a shared drive that I have edit access on. That's going to put the document in here with the little shortcut arrow, meaning that if I make changes to this document and people are viewing it through the shared drive, they would still see those changes. But the weird thing about it is I still own this document, and this document is now living outside of a shared drive. So if I were to deactivate my Google account or delete it, those shortcuts would no longer exist, which kind of like overrides the whole purpose of the shared drive to begin with. So I'm just pointing that out too. You can use shortcuts into shared drives, but you might want to think about the long-term possibilities of that, because it's not really technically living there. Let's talk about how to create a shared drive. So in order to create one, you actually have to click on the shared drive menu and then go to New. Notice the only option I have here is to create a new shared drive. I'll create a test drive, and once I create a test drive, the next thing would be to designate those share permissions. Okay, so if I click this little drop down, I can manage my members. I have some advanced share settings here, and then the theme actually is visible to everybody who has access to the shared drive. I can either pick from the gallery or create something on my own. So I will just come in here and pick something at random. In terms of share permissions, the share permissions on a shared drive are a little bit different. And so for example, if I wanted to add my test student as a collaborator on the shared drive, notice that the language is definitely different than just editor, commenter, and viewer. So you can have multiple managers on a shared drive. A manager in a shared drive sense also can add additional people to a shared drive and control the higher settings, the overarching settings, in addition to, adding, editing, and deleting files. Content managers can do all of the content managing, but they don't have the ability to add people or change the highest level of settings for that shared drive. And then you kind of go down from there. So you would want to just make sure you're applying the correct permissions to your shared drive. And additionally, you can also add groups to your shared drive. Keep in mind, too, I think this gets a little bit tricky. If we're asking each building, each office to have a shared drive where they keep all of their office documentation in one central place, you may not want your faculty to see everything in the shared drive. And that's okay. You might just have your principals and your secretaries on as like the managing piece and the people who can view and see everything in there. But that's not to say that once you start adding folders of content to your shared drive, that you can't add permissions to individual folders in the shared drive. So pretending that this is my, office communication or my office documentation shared drive, when I click into it, you can see that I have 7 members who can see and interact with everything in the shared drive in some capacity. But if I right-click on a folder, I could share an individual folder with a group, such as, MS faculty. So if I know that that group is only going to need access to 1 or 2 folders, I could just manually change the access for those folders rather than giving them access to everything in the shared drive. The other thing to point out with shared drives is we really shouldn't be managing them in the same way that we do with folders. A shared drive should be a central repository where we have lots of folders within it. Think about a shared drive as a full-on filing cabinet, right? It wouldn't really make sense if I only put one folder in every single filing cabinet. If I had 10 worth of student data in 10 separate filing cabinets, that would be a huge waste of space and resources. So keep in mind that each of these shared drives is like an individual filing cabinet system, and that we really shouldn't have a shared drive with just a couple pieces of information or a couple folders within it. Okay? It should be, broader than that. To add files to a shared drive, you can add them in the exact same way that you did to folders. So we can add new files, we can add new folders, we can do file and folder uploads, we can drag and drop files and folders from our computer, and all of those things will land files and folders in the shared drive. Just keep in mind that when you put stuff in the shared drive, the ownership does change. The other thing to talk about with shared drives is that if you click on the shared drive settings, there are 3 settings, well 4, that are usually checkmarked by default. One is, by default, you can invite people outside of our district to access files. Another one, this is what allowed us to invite people who weren't shared drive members to access maybe just like a couple folders of things in our shared drive. And then role permissions, if you want to give content managers an additional permission, you could allow them to share folders that they're part of. And then the other one is very similar to sharing a document. You can disable the ability of viewers and commenters to download, print, and copy files from a shared drive. Right? So it's definitely worth taking a look at those additional share permissions. In terms of deleting a shared drive, one of the things that we've learned is that only managers, full-on managers, can delete a shared drive. And in order to delete a shared drive, there has to be no content in the shared drive. So for example, if I come into my Tech Mentor shared drive, I'm a manager here, but notice that this is grayed out. I would have to delete all of these folders and be a manager in order for the option to delete to be available. The one thing that you can do as a workaround, you'll notice sometimes that you have shared drives shared with you that you don't really need or use. If you right-click, you can hide a shared drive, even if you're not a manager. Once you hide a shared drive, you'll see up here, this little button becomes unlocked, where you can go to find any kind of hidden shared drives. Okay? And then from within here, if I wanted to get my shared drive back, I could unhide it. And it will be visible again in my list. All right, next, let's talk about this Google Drive for Desktop that we've mentioned several times. If you are on a Windows computer, yours is going to look different than mine because I'm on a Mac. But on your Windows computer, down near where the clock and the battery indicators are, there's like a little up arrow to a menu that you can click on, and you should see a Google Drive icon. If you don't see a Google Drive icon there, there's a chance that you don't have it installed. And you can help desk that, and then somebody will come to install it for you. If you have it, but it's kind of like grayed out, that means that it's installed, but you need to log into it. So you can click on the icon to log into your Google account, and it'll take a few minutes to get itself set up. Once it is set up, wherever the box that pops up when you save files, usually you can see all your drives listed. You should start to see a Google Drive listed in those list of drives. So you might see like your C drive, your S drive, your N drive, and then hopefully once you're logged into the Google Drive for Desktop, you'll also see your Google Drive. What this allows you to do is to kind of have like a middleman. So without even logging in to Google Chrome, I can now access any of my Google Drive files and folders. Notice I don't have the pretty colors, it's totally different, but all my folders are here. And if I clicked into like the test folder that I've been using, you can see all of those files are in the folder. The reason that this is helpful is because, for example, if I move a file into my test folder that I might be working on, the test folder will automatically sync those files to my Google Drive so that no matter where I am, I might have the ability to work on it through apps on my computer, but automatically sync it to the cloud while I'm making those changes. So it kind of automates all of that. So for example, I want to use maybe this Google Doc, and I'm just going to drag the Google Doc into the folder that I want it to go into. I already had it in there, so I'm going to replace it for now. So now let's say I want to go work on that file. I come into Google Drive, I click into my drive, I find my test folder, I open that docx file that I just moved over. Because I'm on my computer side, and because this is a docx file, when I click on this to open, notice that my computer automatically knows to open this in Microsoft Word. But if I make changes to this file, the nice thing is that when I save it, those changes, you probably can't see my screen. I need to move my window up a little farther. But see how this icon is spinning? Those changes were already synced to the stored file in my Google Drive. So in this way, I can kind of use both systems simultaneously. If I'm on the web, or if I open an actual Google Doc, right, my computer realizes it's Google Doc and it opens the Chrome browser to continue working. If I wanted to force this Google Doc into opening into Microsoft Office, I could easily download this as a Word document and then I could work on it through Word. But as long as that file is saved as a doc file, I can have it saved and syncing to my Google Drive while I'm working on it in Microsoft Word, because it's a docx file. Okay. When I open up my Google Drive for desktop, and the same thing for you, when I click on this icon, okay, notice that it's showing me for today, it made all of these syncs and changes for us. If I click on the settings gear and I go to preferences, you should see your computer as well as your Google Drive. The other nice thing that you can do is you can sync an entire folder to Google Drive for desktop by finding the folder and then clicking open. I don't really have any that I would like to sync, but here, if I click open, I actually did my desktop as a whole folder. Now every time I make changes to my desktop, it automatically syncs those changes to my Google Drive, but that's already up there. So sure. It's asking if I want to sync with Google Drive, so I'm going to make sure that's checked. There were 8 files in there, and I'm going to hit save. Just giving Google permission to access the contents in that folder. And so now you can see that the icon is spinning. It is automatically bringing up those files into the cloud and syncing them, so that if I were to go back to my Google Drive and go to computers, I would actually have a couple things in here. This is my computer, it's a MacBook Air. Notice this was the desktop folder that I said I brought up before. So anytime I make changes to my desktop, it automatically keeps this up to date. And then this was the change that I just made. I brought in the whole active software folder. So again, anytime I would make changes to anything in here, it would keep it current and in sync with my Google Drive as well. So in this way, you can add files and folders to Google Drive for Desktop by dragging them and sharing them. But you can also add like root files from your computer to Google Drive for Desktop by going into Google Drive, clicking on the settings, going to preferences, and then adding folders from your computer. All right, let's see about deleting, because I don't really need this one to be up here. So if I right click, I can remove this whole folder. It'll take it out of my Google Drive for Desktop sync, and it'll send it to the trash in my Google Drive. Next, let's talk about some of the functions that are common across all of the Google Workspace apps. The first one that I like to talk about is commenting. So no matter if you're in a doc or a sheet or a slide, as long as you're at least a commenter or an editor, you have the ability to add comments to the document. I'm actually going to use this one instead. So in order to add a comment, the first thing you would do is highlight what you would like to comment about, and then you can tap on the comment icon and click the plus sign to add a comment. I'm also going to draw your attention to the little notification bell. In every document that you are either a commenter or an editor on, you have access to your own notification settings. So if you click that, it always defaults to all comments. That way, if anybody puts a comment in the document, as long as you're a commenter or an editor, you'll receive an email about any new comment activity. You can change that though, depending on the document. You know, maybe you only want to be maybe only be notified about app mentions, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, or any threads that maybe somebody puts your name into. And then none means that no matter how many comments are added, you're not going to be getting an email notification that it was made. And then same thing at the bottom. By default, it's on none. But if you want to know as soon as somebody makes an edit or removes some content from this particular document, you can turn that on. And it'll stay on just for this document until you change it. The same thing is true, these notification settings follow the user. So even if this document is shared with 10 people, these comment settings are only pertaining to me. I'm not changing these for anybody else who's on the document. Okay? So to make a comment, you would click on the plus sign and you would type your comment. And then you would hit the comment button. Once you do that, everybody who this document is shared with would get an email that you made this comment. They could then come in, and if you were asking a question, they could come in and they could reply to the comment. Once the comment is taken care of, somebody can also resolve the comment by clicking this check mark. And that way, it's still retrievable, but it's no longer in sight of the document. Because keep in mind, if those comments are there, anybody who's a commenter or editor, when they come into the document, they're going to see all of those comments unless they're resolved. So now that I resolved the comment, if I wanted to see it, I could just come in to the commenting thread and take a look at those previous comments. I can also sort the comments by any of these methods here. All right, the other thing with commenting that's helpful to be aware of is, for example, this overdrive piece is a librarian piece. This is something that the librarians handle. So if I had a specific question about overdrive, I might not want to put a general comment. I might want to loop in, especially if they're not already part of my document. You know, I might do what's called an @ mention. So I'm going to @ mention Mrs. Hanlon, and because I put the @ mention in there, even though Mrs. Hanlon is not on this particular document, she will get an email that I put this comment. So I would just type my question, can you please remind me of ... whatever. If I want to take it a step further, I can actually assign this task to Mrs. Hanlon. She will get an email that says, Kelly Rissel assigned this to you. And when she comes in, she'll actually have to check a box to okay that she made the change, to verify the change. If I just want to do the at mention, I would type the at mention, type the comment, and hit comment. Mrs. Hanlon will get an email notification that I mentioned her in the comment. I could also at mention lots of people. So you can at mention more than one. So that's just a shortcut way to make sure that they're going to get the email, especially if there's something specific you want them to be aware of. All right, so those are the commenting features. The other thing to point out is that no matter if you're in Docs, Sheets, or Slides, if you want to download the file, you can come to File, Download, and depending on which app you're in, you have a bunch of different options to download. So if I wanted to download this file back into a Word doc, it will download it. It'll store it, locally to my computer, and I can open it and I can work on it again in Microsoft Word. If I want to download this because I want to send it out as a PDF, I could click to download as PDF, and then I could attach it, maybe to my email. You have different options depending on if you're in Sheets or Slides. They'll have a whole separate set, but it's worth taking a look at the file download options so you know it's available. The other thing that's helpful, and it's something that I use with this particular document and other documents where you're editing and updating them every year, is something called a version history. So what I used to do, because I like to update the technology subscriptions from year to year, but I don't necessarily, I don't want to get rid of the previous year, so I would make a copy. I used to make a copy, file, make a copy. That would take my 22-23 document, it would copy over that template, and then I would make changes to it, and I would save it as the next year. But I found a few years ago that got really clunky too, because I ended up with like 8 copies of the same but slightly different version, and I started using something instead called the version history. So version history is subtly different, but basically what happens, if I show you, if I go to see version history, notice that this is basically my revision history. If you scroll back to this document, you can see changes all the way back to when the document was created. But notice, once I finished making changes in August, I named the version history 2021 Tech Subscriptions. So if I ever want to go back to see this document in its entirety, the exact way that it looked when I sent it out to staff, I could scroll through my 2021 version rather than having to go out and open maybe a new folder or a new file, if I just want to do a quick comparison. And as I scroll up, you'll see the 2021 version and then the 22-23 version. So my hope is to continue to name the versions once I finalize these updates each year, and then I kind of have all of my documents in one place. If you wanted a side-by-side, maybe you want to look at last year versus this year, you could open the same document in 2 tabs and then just open one version in one tab and the other version in another. And you could kind of do like a side-by-side comparison. So that's the version history. It's kind of a part of the revision history. It just allows you to name the current version of what you're working on, kind of give it like a timestamp as to when that was done. The revision history, on the other hand, you'll see my versions are in here. This is really showing me a step-by-step look at every keystroke change that was made to this document since it was created. So 2 things that are related but not entirely the same. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is actually something in Google Drive. So I'm going to go back to my Google Drive, and I want to talk about this little check mark. Notice that it says ready for offline. Unless you've enabled a setting in your Google Drive, you probably don't see this icon. But if you come into the settings gear, and you go into settings, you can check mark the box that says create, open, and edit your recent Google Docs, Sheets, and Slides files while offline. Basically, that means that once this is enabled, you can come into documents and you can make certain documents available offline. Notice how this document, when I right-clicked on it, it's not available, so I can make it available. And it's saying at the bottom that I made my file visible for offline access. So let's say we lost internet over the weekend. I would still be able to open my computer, go to my Google Drive, and I would be able to work on this document. I would be able to edit it, make changes, until the next time I went online. Then all of the changes would sync, and it will sort of locally store those changes on this document until I'm back on internet. So the first thing is to enable the setting. The second thing is to make certain documents available for offline use. I would obviously only do those, like if you know you're going to need something in the event of an emergency, you might want to make those available for offline use. That could be super handy and powerful depending on what your role is. The other thing to point out in Google Drive is basically how to search for stuff. So if you know the title, it's easy to search for it by title. If you don't know the title, you can swing over here to the search filters menu that pops up, search options, and you could search by, if you know the type of document it is, if you know who owns the document, you could type their name in, or maybe you only know a couple words, so you could kind of fill in the pieces that you know, and then it would search across your Google Drive and just bring back the things that you indicated. But the other thing that Google recently added, and I'm trying to think of something that I can search. We'll just search Google. Notice whenever I search something in Google and I hit enter, it gives me now these what they call smart chips. So you can specify specifically where you want Google to search. And it's kind of really similar to the search options feature that I just showed. It's just a different way of getting there. So you could search for a specific person, the last time it was modified, and you could go through and you could maybe, locate something by 3 of these criteria. It'll just help to kind of like narrow the focus of your search so you can hopefully more easily and quickly find what you need. But just drawing your attention to those pieces at the top. All right, so jumping back to the top here into our document, I wanted to show you the activity tracker, which kind of looks like a little stock symbol. If you click on this, it'll open your activity dashboard. This is the activity dashboard for this particular document. Obviously, if the document isn't shared with anybody, you're not going to have a lot of activity. But for things that it is shared out, it is helpful to come in and you can view the progress or the history of certain things. So for example, if I wanted to see who it was shared with, that's in this first column. If I wanted to see who viewed my document, I could click on all viewers. And as I scroll through, you can kind of see who was viewing the document, on which date, so on and so forth. This will graph, if you change the parameters, it'll graph how many people were viewing it over time. This will show you if any comments were left. You see new comments, replies, unresolved comments, if you want to take a look at that. The sharing history is helpful. You can see anytime share permissions were changed on a document, which can be super helpful if you had editors on there and suddenly people who you didn't want to have access. But you can kind of see who changed the permissions, when they changed the permissions, and what they actually did, who was added. And then lastly, the settings gear. This is really your privacy settings. These things only apply to you. So if you don't want people to be able to see that you're viewing their stuff, you can turn your account setting piece off. Sometimes it's helpful for people to see that you're actually looking at the stuff they send you, so I would just be careful with what and when you're toggling that off. And that setting applies across the board, so it's not just applying to a particular document, it's across all files that are shared with you. Kind of hides your visibility. Another helpful piece to know about is if you are an editor on a document, by default, we get put into this editing mode. But if you are looking for an easy way to make suggestions on a document, you can change editing to suggesting. And for example, if you were revising something for somebody else, you could come in and make changes. For example, let's say you wanted to propose deleting out this section and maybe replacing it with the words oops. Okay, once you do that and hit enter, it creates the deletion and the change so that other editors on the document can come in, and if they hit the check mark, it will make both of those changes with just the click of a button. So if they hit check, it's going to delete what was there originally, and it's going to change it to all students K through 12. So by suggesting, it's kind of like a shortcut way to show changes and a really shortcut way for people to accept those changes. So that's the suggesting function. And one additional piece to mention, which you can get to through the waffle menu in Google, is the Google Workspace Marketplace. So coming into the waffle menu, at the very bottom, you should see more from Google Workspace Marketplace. So clicking on this, there's a lot of stuff going on in here. I wanted to draw your attention over to the left where it says Editor's Choice, or Most Popular or Top Rated. These would be good places to start looking. These are things that you can add on to a document to give it more functionality than it has originally. So for example, here's a mail merge add-on. Notice that you can see it works with Sheets and Docs. It also works with Gmail. There's over 3 million views. So that might grab my interest. I'm going to click on it. Here's where you can kind of see what it does, and you can also see pricing. So notice that this one says free of charge with paid features. I'm not really sure. Here we go. First campaign, and then free for up to 30 emails, plan start. So I could give this a try if I thought it would be really helpful, and if I didn't think that I was going to need to purchase the paid pieces. You shouldn't have an admin install, but you should have an individual install that you can click to install this into your own. In this case, it's going to install for Docs and Sheets and Gmail. I'll show you how to access that in a minute. Coming back to like Business Essentials, you can start to read through some of the things that these things will automate. So this one will export data from many sources to Google Sheets. That might be super helpful. Here's another mail merge one for Google Docs. 2 million. This is one that I have installed. Notice that the pricing of this one is free of charge, and looks like out of 2.5 million people, it got pretty decent reviews. And I really just needed to do a mail merge, so we weren't looking for anything real specific or fancy here. But again, you could read through, you could install it, and then when I go into my Google Docs, over here on the side is where you can see some of those add-ons. This is where the mail merge one lives. So when I click this, notice it opens in a sidebar, and it's kind of very similar to Microsoft Word. It'll take me through these little tutorials of how to actually print those mail merge files. The other place that some of these items in the marketplace may get installed is in this extensions file menu. Going to extensions and add-ons, these are also different tools that will allow docs to function in different ways. I'll say better ways, but it's really just a matter of things that it really couldn't do originally that these allow it to do. So I wanted to draw your attention to the marketplace. because there might be some really helpful things that you would love to have as like automated features. I know that if we go to top charts, I know that there's a lot for Google Forms that is super helpful. Things where it will automatically close a form after so many people respond, the ability to generate automatic emails from forms. So these things range from docs to sheets to slides and beyond to what they connect with. But here's one, form notifications. So those are the automatic email ones. Form Mule, I definitely hear about quite a bit. But yeah, you can definitely, this is one that we're looking to use actually with teachers at the couple at the middle school who have Google Docs, but really should convert them to Google Forms. And this piece will do that automatically for them. So, and you can see 10 million people, 10 million downloads. So yeah, this may be worth just taking a look to see what exists. And if one of the things that you install doesn't do what you were hoping, there's a good chance that there's other creators of the same exact thing. Like there's probably handfuls of mail merge. So it's really about finding the one that you think works the best for what you're using it for. Thank you so much for checking out this tutorial video. If there's anything that I can provide or questions that I can answer, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thanks for watching.